Is that a pet or a snack? The alien pondered. Ragnar, a hulking beast with a dozen eyes and fangs as long as a man's forearm, stared at the tiny creature in the holding cell. The other raiders crowded around, their guttural laughter echoing through the ship's steel corridors. The tiny creature, no taller than a loaf of bread, had a set of delicate wings folded against its back and bright, intelligent eyes that watched the aliens with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. This was Trill, a member of the diminutive but highly intelligent species known as the Planer. Alone, Trill looked anything but threatening, especially surrounded by the towering armored raiders of the Yax clan. The raiders continued their mockery, jostling each other and making crude jokes at Trill's expense. "Did you see how it fluttered when we captured it, like a bug in a jar?" one jeered. "Maybe we should squash it and put it out of its misery," another suggested, making a show of raising his massive boot. Trill, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. His voice, though small, carried a surprising weight of authority. "I would advise against that. My partner is on his way." The raiders paused, their laughter dying down as they processed this unexpected declaration. Then the leader of the group, a particularly massive Ithra with a scar running down one side of his face, stepped forward. "And who might this partner be? Another insect, or perhaps a child? You Planer are known for your flights of fancy." Trill's eyes narrowed slightly. "My partner is human." This statement elicited another round of laughter, even louder than before. Humans, despite their technological advancements and strategic prowess, were still considered weak by many species, especially the battle-hardened Ithra. They were seen as fragile, emotionally volatile, and overly reliant on their machines. "A human?" the scarred leader chuckled. "Is he coming to negotiate your release? Or perhaps he's bringing you a cozy little cage to live in?" Before Trill could respond, another raider interjected. "Maybe he's bringing you a bedtime story, little bug. What will you do when he realizes you're just a helpless little thing?" Trill remained calm, his gaze unwavering. "You underestimate humans at your own peril. Captain Hayes is not one to be trifled with." The raiders exchanged glances, their amusement tinged with a hint of unease. The Ithra were not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone as seemingly insignificant as Trill. They thrived on fear and intimidation, and the tiny Planer's calm confidence was unsettling. "Enough of this nonsense," the scarred leader growled. "Take him to the brig. We'll see if his human friend is foolish enough to try and rescue him." Two raiders stepped forward and roughly grabbed Trill, dragging him out of the holding cell and down the corridor. Trill did not resist, knowing that any struggle would be futile. Instead, he focused on maintaining a mental link with Captain Hayes, ensuring his partner was aware of the situation. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the raider ship, the Ithra continued to mock Trill. "How does it feel to be the weakest creature in the galaxy, bug?" one of them sneered, giving him a rough shove. "Do you think your human will come running to save you?" another taunted. "Maybe he's too scared to face us." Trill didn't respond. He knew that Captain Hayes would come, and when he did, the raiders would regret their arrogance. But for now, he had to endure their taunts and wait for the right moment. They reached the brig, a small dark room with reinforced walls and a single cell. The raiders threw Trill inside and locked the door, laughing as they left him alone. Trill sat down calmly, closing his eyes and focusing his mind. He needed to stay connected with Hayes, to let him know he was still alive and waiting. Meanwhile, the raiders gathered in their command center, discussing their next move. The scarred leader paced back and forth, his mind racing with possibilities. "If this human does come, we'll use him as leverage. The coalition will pay a high price for one of their precious captains." One of the other raiders, a lean reptilian creature with piercing yellow eyes, spoke up. "And if he doesn't come? What then?" the leader asked. "Then we dispose of the bug and move on," the leader replied, his voice cold and decisive. "Ruthless, either way, we win." Back in the brig, Tragon remained composed. He could sense Anderson getting closer, his partner's determination and resolve giving him strength. The bond between them was strong, forged through countless missions and shared dangers. Tragon knew that Anderson would not rest until he was safe. Suddenly, The ship shuddered as alarms blared throughout the corridors. The raiders tensed, their previous bravado replaced by a sudden sense of urgency. "What's happening?" one of them barked. "Unidentified vessel approaching." A voice crackled over the intercom. "Weapon systems active." The scarred leader's eyes narrowed. "So, the human has arrived. Let's see if he's as formidable as the bug claims." As the raiders scrambled to their stations, the atmosphere on the ship shifted from one of mocking amusement to tense anticipation. The real battle was about to begin, and Tragon knew that soon the raiders would learn the true meaning of fear. The raiders' ship shuddered again, this time with more intensity as the approaching vessel's weapons continued their assault. The alarms blared louder, their urgent wails mingling with the frantic shouts of the raiders as they hurried to their battle stations. In the brig, Tragon could feel the vibrations through the cold metal floor. He opened his eyes, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Anderson was here, and things were about to get very interesting. The raider leader, now visibly agitated, stormed into the command center, barking orders. "Get our defenses online. I want that ship destroyed before it breaches our hull." "But sir," one of the technicians stammered, "the craft is too fast. Our targeting systems can't lock onto it." The leader's eyes blazed with fury. "Then shoot everything we've got. I want that ship turned into scrap." Outside, the sleek black spacecraft known as the Vindicator darted through the void with incredible agility. Its angular design and advanced technology made it a formidable opponent. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ethan Anderson maintained a steel focus. His hands moved deftly over the controls. "Computer, status report," Anderson commanded. "Shields at 80%, weapon systems fully operational." The computer responded in its calm, synthesized voice. "Good. Keep the pressure on. We need to create an opening for boarding," Anderson said, his voice cold and determined. The Vindicator fired another barrage of laser blasts, targeting the raider ship's weapon arrays. Explosions erupted along the vessel's surface, sending fragments of metal spiraling into space. Inside, the raiders struggled to maintain control as the ship rocked violently. The leader's frustration reached a boiling point. "Prepare a boarding party. If that human wants a fight, we'll give him one." Back in the brig, Tragon felt a sharp spike of anxiety from Anderson through their mental link. "Ethan, they're preparing to board. Be careful," Tragon communicated telepathically. "I've got it under control, Tragon. Just sit tight." "I'm coming for you," Anderson replied, his mental voice reassuring despite the chaos. As the Vindicator continued its relentless assault, a docking tube extended from the raider ship, latching onto the smaller craft with a metallic clank. The raiders, armed to the teeth, gathered at the entry point, ready to storm the vessel and capture the audacious human. Inside the Vindicator, Anderson took a deep breath, steeling himself for the imminent confrontation. He activated the internal defenses, a series of automated turrets and traps designed to neutralize intruders. The airlock hissed open, and the first wave of raiders poured in, weapons drawn and faces twisted with anticipation. The Vindicator's internal defenses sprang to life. Turrets emerged from hidden compartments, unleashing a hail of bullets and laser fire upon the invaders. The raiders, caught off guard, scrambled for cover, their initial confidence replaced by confusion and fear. Anderson moved with the precision and grace of a seasoned warrior. His blaster fired in rapid succession, each shot finding its mark. He navigated the narrow corridors of his ship with ease, using the environment to his advantage. The raiders, despite their numbers and brute strength, were no match for his skill and strategy. The leader of the raiders, watching the carnage unfold from the command center, clenched his fists in frustration. "Fall back. Regroup at the secondary entry point," he ordered, his voice tinged with desperation. As the raiders retreated, Anderson took a moment to assess the situation. The Vindicator had taken some damage, but it was still operational. More importantly, he had bought himself some time. He needed to act quickly if he was going to rescue Tragon and get out of this alive. "Tragon, I'm making my way to you." "Hold on," Anderson communicated through their mental link. "I'll be ready," Tragon replied, his voice steady and calm. Anderson navigated his way through the raider ship, moving with purpose and determination. He encountered pockets of resistance along the way, but his training and experience served him well. Each confrontation ended swiftly, with the raiders falling before they had a chance to mount a serious challenge. Meanwhile, in the brig, Trogon focused his mind, preparing himself for the impending showdown. Inevitable showdown. He knew that the raiders would not give up easily, and that he would need to rely on his mental abilities to aid Dixon in the final push. As Dixon neared the brig, the resistance grew fiercer. The raiders, realizing that their prey was close to escaping, fought with renewed desperation. Dixon pressed on, his blaster never wavering, his resolve unshaken. Finally, Dixon reached the brig. The door slid open, revealing Kale standing calmly amidst the chaos. Dixon crouched down, extending a hand to his tiny partner. "Took you long enough," Kale said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Dixon smiled. "Let's get you out of here." But before they could make their escape, the scarred leader of the raiders appeared, blocking their path. His eyes burned with fury, and his massive frame filled the doorway. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what's ours?" he growled. Dixon stood his ground, his blaster trained on the leader. "Step aside. This is your last chance." The leader laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the corridor. "You're a fool if you think you can defeat me." Kale, sensing the danger, reached out with his mind, probing the leader's thoughts for any sign of weakness. He found a glimmer of fear buried deep beneath the bravado and latched onto it, amplifying it until the leader's confidence began to waver. Dixon took advantage of the distraction, firing a precise shot that struck the leader's weapon, disarming him. The leader roared in anger, but before he could react, Dixon moved in, delivering a swift and powerful blow that sent the leader crashing to the floor. With the path now clear, Dixon and Kale made their way back to the Mantis, fighting off the remaining raiders as they went. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave, Dixon glanced back at the crippled raider vessel. "We're not done yet, Kale," he said, powering up the engines. "They're going to regret underestimating us." Kale nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Let's show them what a human and a Pavian can really do." The Mantis sped away, leaving the Ithra raiders to lick their wounds and ponder the formidable partnership that had just torn through their ranks. But the battle was far from over, and both Dixon and Kale knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. As the Mantis sped away from the Ithra raider vessel, the ship's systems worked to repair the damage sustained during the intense firefight. Captain Dixon kept a vigilant eye on the sensors, knowing that their escape was only the first step in a much larger battle. "Kale, how are you holding up?" Dixon asked, glancing at his tiny companion perched on the control panel. "I'm fine, Dixon, but we need to disable that raider ship permanently." "They won't stop coming after us," Kale replied, his voice tinged with concern. Dixon nodded. "Agreed. Let's find a place to regroup and plan our next move." The Mantis soared through space, putting distance between them and the crippled raider ship. Dixon located a nearby asteroid field, a perfect spot to hide and prepare for their counterattack. The Mantis slipped into the field, using the massive rocks as cover while the crew plotted their next steps. "Jonathan, I've been analyzing the raider ship schematics," Kale said, his wings fluttering slightly as he concentrated. "There's a central power core that, if overloaded, could cause a catastrophic chain reaction." Dixon grinned. "That's our ticket. How do we get close enough to trigger it?" Kale's eyes gleamed with determination. "I can interface with their systems remotely, but I'll need to be within a certain range. You'll have to get me to the ship undetected." Dixon nodded, understanding. "We'll cloak the Mantis and approach them silently. Once we're in range, you do your thing." The Mantis powered up its cloaking device, rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Dixon piloted the ship with expert precision, navigating through the asteroid field and closing the distance to the Ithra vessel, now undergoing emergency repairs. As they approached the raider ship, Dixon kept his eyes on the sensors, ensuring they remained undetected. "Kale, are you ready?" "Ready," Kale affirmed, his tiny hands poised over the control interface. Dixon maneuvered the Mantis into position, holding his breath as they crept closer. Finally, Kale's console lit up, indicating a successful connection to the raider ship systems. "Got it," Kale announced. Initiating overload sequence now. Inside the Raider ship, alarms began blaring once again as the central power core surged beyond safe limits. The scarred leader, still nursing his wounds from the earlier confrontation, stared at the control panel in horror. "What's happening?" he bellowed. "Sir, the power core is overloading. We need to evacuate," a panicked technician shouted. The leader's eyes widened in realization. It's the human and the Pavian. They've done this. Back on the Mantis, Kale focused all his mental energy on maintaining the overload sequence. "Almost there, Dixon. Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, the Raider ship's power core reached critical mass. A blinding flash of light erupted from the vessel, followed by a massive explosion that tore the ship apart. Debris scattered in all directions as the Ithra Raiders were consumed by the inferno. Dixon didn't wait to see the aftermath. He punched the Mantis's engines, propelling them away from the blast zone and out of danger. Kale collapsed onto the control panel, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it, Dixon. The Raiders are finished," Kale said, his voice weak but filled with satisfaction. Dixon smiled, relief washing over him. "You were amazing, Kale. I couldn't have done it without you." The Mantis soared through space, leaving the remnants of the Ithra ship behind. Dixon and Kale took a moment to catch their breath, knowing that their partnership had just achieved something extraordinary. "Kale, we make a pretty good team," Dixon said, offering a small, sincere smile. Kale nodded, his wings fluttering gently. "Indeed we do, Dixon. Indeed we do." As they continued their journey, Dixon reflected on the bond he shared with Kale. Despite their differences in size and species, they had proven that true strength lay in unity and trust. Together, they had faced down a formidable enemy and emerged victorious. Their mission complete, Dixon set a course for home, ready to report their success to the human coalition. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but with allies like Kale by his side, Dixon knew they could face any challenge that came their way. The Mantis sailed through the stars, a symbol of the unbreakable partnership between a human and a Pavian. And as they ventured into the unknown, both Dixon and Kale knew that their greatest adventures were still ahead of them, waiting to be discovered.